Hey, good morning, guys. It is Thursday morning. Following up with you guys from yesterday, I got everybody or received everybody's 9.2 quiz. There were a couple of you that I didn't hear from, so I sent you a personal email. But I hope everybody is doing well and you're getting all of your schoolwork done. So today we're going to start with chapter 10. We finished 9 and we're going to start 10 today. So we're really right in the middle, in the midst of the civil rights movement. And the last thing that we talked about in chapter 9.2 is the Montgomery bus boycott. That sort of sparked things. And then the next big thing that's going to occur during the civil rights movement are going to be what are called sit-ins. And what sit-ins were black students and black kids would go to like counters to restaurants, and they would sit at the white counters, because if you remember, everything was separate but equal, and they would sit at white counters and ask to be served, and they wouldn't be. So if you're following along with me this morning on page 366, we're covering page 366 through 368. I always talk to you guys about the pictures, and yet again, here's one. You can see these these four black guys, and this started in Greensboro. They were called the Greensboro sit-ins. And here you can see Joseph McNeil, Franklin McCain, Billy Smith, and Clarence Henderson. You don't have to remember their names, but I do want you to know that they were the four young African-American college students that went to a Woolworth's lunch counter in Greensboro and sat there, and they asked to be served, and they wouldn't. So this started all over the nation, really in the South, and that's what they would do. They still wouldn't serve them, but it was just their way of protesting. So the Greensboro sit-ins on Monday, February 1st, 1960, four black college students changed the course of North Carolina history. Those four guys that I just mentioned to you walked together to the Woolworth store in downtown Greensboro. They sat down at the lunch counter and asked for coffee and donuts. The waitresses refused to serve them. African Americans were not served at lunch counters in Greensboro or any other southern city. The students sat and waited. Soon people began to notice. Some shouted curses, a few whispered encouragement. A policeman walked up and down the aisles, club in hand, but did nothing. The students sat at the counter until the store closed, and they got up and walked home. So they were never served, but what they did is they inspired African-American kids all over the South to do the same thing. So this was the sit-in movement. So we were right in the middle of the civil rights movement. That all started with Miss Rosa Parks, we talked about, in Montgomery, with her refusing to let a white man have her seat on the bus. And so that is where we are. What these kids were really doing is they were the first generation of kids to really challenge what would be known or becomes known as just the status quo. So many different groups challenge what the status quo is for whatever the cause is at the time. Look on page 367 at this graph of segregation in 1950. If you look, you can see how all of the southern states, from West Virginia, all the way down through Texas and Louisiana, all of those states, southern states, were segregated. Segregation was required. So the blacks and whites, they didn't eat at the same restaurants. They didn't use the same bathrooms. If you look up in the north, segregation was prohibited. And then if you look out west, it was sort of hit or miss. Segregation permitted in varying degrees. And then California obviously was no specific legislation on segregation. But the point that I'm trying to make from all of that is I've told you this before. For example, my mom and dad, probably your grandparents, would have never have gone to school if they were born and raised in the South, Eastern North Carolina, or for that matter, South Carolina, Tennessee, or wherever, with a black kid. My dad would tell me that he never went to school with black kids, but he'd come home and play with them after school. But the schools were segregated. So we're rounding the bend here, and all of that is about to be challenged, and things are going to change. If you turn over to page 368, the civil rights movement really takes off. The sit-ins are occurring all over the South. It says by the end of 1960, 50,000 people had participated in sit-ins and other civil rights demonstrations around the South. In the city after city, black college students, dressed in their Sunday best, walked downtown to lunch counters and asked politely to be served. They usually never were, but it was just their way. Again, there's another picture on page 368. You can see the guys are sitting there. You can see the ladies in the back This was a time, obviously, if you look on page 368, smoking was allowed in restaurants. So you can see the two white ladies, they're sitting there smoking a cigarette, and you can see the black kids, they're there and they're just doing their schoolwork because they won't serve them. So they're just doing they're doing their homework. And those were kids at St. Augustine College, which is a predominantly black college today in Raleigh. And they just began to organize themselves. The SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, they were especially active in Mississippi. The state considered the most dangerous for civil rights workers. Excuse me, I got tongue-tied. We've talked about how bad things were in Mississippi. I told you about that movie, Mississippi Burning. Things were much worse in the Deep South. The people in the Deep South, Mississippi, Louisiana, South Alabama, they were just very uninterested in the schools becoming segregated. And but all of that is about to change. So that is where we are now. We skip over to one more page. I do want to mention one other picture there. If you look on page 370 at the top, and there's a little section here on Gandhi. You know, Gandhi was an Indian leader that he led a nonviolent march to protest the British salt monopoly, and he's just known as a movement, or just a mover of peace throughout the country. After the U.S. Civil Rights Movement adopted Gandhi's nonviolent philosophy, other people began to do the same. So they were inspired by Mohandas Gandhi, many of them were. Look at this last picture, page 370. You can see people who did not agree with the message of the sit-in poured ketchup and mustard on these protesters, and you can see there were some white people there at this time that are sitting there, and they are sitting along beside the black people supporting them, and then you can see the people in the background obviously heckling them and just pouring ketchup and mustard on them. So this was a pretty intense time to have lived in, to have been a young person, but they were just trying to stand up for their rights. So I wanted to cover those pages. What I would like you to do tonight for homework, I would like for you to read pages 371. There's a section there on 371, the green block, North Carolina school desegregation. It talks about Brown versus the Board of Education. I would like for you to read that. Read 371, skip 372, 373, and then that'll take you to 374 and 375. So read 371 and read 374 and 375, and I will be with you again sometime tomorrow. And again, I'll try to get your quiz grades for 9.2 on RimWeb today. Again, you need to email me if you have any questions or you need anything. I hope you and your families are doing well. I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye.